Hey, what's going on, everybody? Excited about this one. Gregory Hall from Inside Carolina. What's going on, man?
Hey, Christopher, how you doing, man?
Good. Okay, so this was not exactly what we anticipated going into this game before the season started. We expected Miami and North Carolina to really be the top two contenders for the Coastal Division. So let's just get right into it, Gregory. What is going wrong? What has gone wrong for North Carolina so far this year?
It's not really one of those things where you can point to different things because, I mean, you look at the last 4 weeks, they beat Virginia and the offense looks great. Defense has some issues, but they accomplished their game plan of shutting down the run and even though Brennan Armstrong had a great game and threw for over 550 yards, they still did what they needed to do to limit, and that included getting turnovers and things like that, right? So they accomplished what they needed to against Virginia, even though you could look at some things and be like, okay, there's still some issues there. Then you go on the road to Georgia Tech, and the offense can't really do what it needs to do, and the defense can't do what it hasn't done for the last few years, which is stop Jeff Sims. Then it turns around and you go back home and you've got Duke, and the defense plays the best game that it's played in the last 3 years, probably. And it kind of does all the things that it hadn't been doing as far as getting to the quarterback and whatnot. And the offense did what it needed to do against a bad Duke team. And then Florida State comes to town, and it's back to kind of what happened against Georgia Tech, right? It's just like, so I guess, long story short, there it's the lack of consistency factor and not being able to put an entire game together on either side of the ball outside of against a Duke team that's just not good at all and will most likely end up at the bottom of the ACC at the end of the season.
And yeah, I've had a chance to watch a number of the games. It's been very. I'm sure you feel the same way. Just been very confusing of watching this, where it's one step forward. It feels like you said, with momentum, and then, even that Virginia game, it felt like, okay, the offense is there, and like you said,
Mm-hmm.
defense. But we've seen what Brendan's been able to do. Obviously, Miami fans have seen that. Just kind of, I'll just touch on what's gone wrong for Miami. So North Carolina's 3-3, 2-3 in the conference already. It's crazy. And then Miami's 2-3 overall, 0-1 in the conference. And for Miami, I think a little bit different than North Carolina is that they've just not looked good on both sides of the ball, multiple areas. Whereas North Carolina seems to have found maybe, some positives here and there, when Miami just kind of struggled throughout. And that's why they're sitting 2-3. They beat Central Connecticut State, an FCS team. And so otherwise they're 1-3, and everyone knows 0-5 in the last five Power Five conference schools, and they've really struggled. And now it's been announced that De'Aaron King's going to be out for the rest of the season. He's not started the last two games, but we'll see how Tyler Van Dyke responds. He did not look good for most of the game against Virginia, although he did have his moments late. They ultimately came up short. So a lot of things have kind of gone wrong for Miami. Essentially, that Alabama game, I really felt like that was the biggest game of the year, because I felt like they'd really need to compete. It could have got some momentum even if they didn't win. And it just seems like they've just not been able to get things going there. Gregory, so there's more we can get into what's wrong with both of these teams, but I want to ask you, can it be fixed for this season? I don't want to get into some long term stuff, particularly on the Miami
Mm-hmm.
side. I know people are thinking more about the future there, but where North Carolina is this season, can it be fixed? Can things get turned around? As both of these teams, they're still hoping to, maybe climb to that 8-9 win mark, even though I know both fan bases are probably like, well, these teams barely look like they're going to be bowl eligible. So can it be fixed? Do you think it can be fixed this season?
I mean, I think some things can and some things can't. And I think that starts with mitigating expectations of what the new not expectations, what the new goals are this season. Because like you said, and what like Mac Brown said this morning, or Monday morning, talking to him just about, we know we're not making the playoff anymore. We know we're not winning the ACC anymore. I mean, I guess it still technically could be possible to go 5-3, but you've lost just tiebreakers to Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, and I don't think Georgia Tech will end up being there. But Pitt's looking good, and it doesn't look good, right? So if you understand that you're trying to just get better and perform and get back on a basis of what you were trying to be at the beginning of the year. That with the expectation of you really don't have to look forward at all anymore because it doesn't exist. So it's not like that burden is lifted. And obviously, it wasn't seen as a burden at the beginning of the year because they were realistic goals. And so when it comes to like what was a major issue this season was Sam Howell was getting sacked left and right, and UNC was one of the worst teams in the country in allowing sacks. Florida State had one on Saturday. So, like, if we're talking about positives, there's a positive. You didn't lose because Sam Howell was on the ground every other play. You lost for other reasons, and you lost for fixable issues. You lost because of fixable issues such as penalties. 7 offensive penalties, 2 of which were false starts by your best player in Josh Downs. Right? Like that's not something that's been a recurring issue. And this is the first time they had double-digit penalties all year. And I don't think they've had more than maybe once or twice, but they've had over 5. So that right away, that's an issue that you can fix with the Hurricanes coming to town. And it also helps that you've got 3 road games, or 3 home games left. Yes, so it's 3 home games, 3 road games, and we know UNC struggled on the road. So just looking at those things and the issues that plagued you against Florida State, it wasn't, oh, we're just not like they just played better than us. Yes, Florida State did play better than Carolina, but Carolina also hurt themselves way more than they've had and the like other games that they struggled in this year, if that makes sense. So I think when you look at it like that way, things can be fixed. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's when why can't you get the ball to your outside receivers? Those are things that can't be fixed by Saturday. If it happens on Saturday, it would be more of a one-off, not necessarily a all-encompassing this issue is fixed. Because I don't think the issue of protecting Sam Howell is fixed. That could be a one-off, and it could very well Miami could have 5-6 sacks on Saturday. But it's just that goes back to the whole consistency thing because this team hasn't really been able to do the same thing more than once, except Josh Downs. He's literally the only one. He's got at least 8 catches in every game, and he's got like almost 750 yards, which is absurd. But so I don't know. There's basically this team is all over the map so it's hard to even know what they are going to do in any given game.
I think from Miami's standpoint, if it can be fixed, it's tough to build on positives or momentum because, again,
Sure,
with how things have gone, and fans are over it. You don't want to hear, and it's hard for them to be optimistic about things because, like I said, the biggest problem with Miami is it's been so many, not just a certain area or if this gets fixed that they'll be fine. It's kind of been lack of production all over the field. And if you look at the stats, kind of with where Miami ranks in numerous categories in the ACC, and I always like to look at the FBS opponents. And I know particularly for the reason that we saw against when they played the FCS team, they just get loaded up there. But Miami's towards the bottom in a lot of these categories. And
yeah,
can it be fixed is more like, guys are going to have to play a lot better than they've shown. And I think it starts with the upperclassmen. There are some things that we didn't see coming. Particular guys like Will Mallory, Mike Harley, those are 2 guys that they expected production. I think there's still some plays that they can make. I don't think that they're just all of a sudden terrible players and can't make plays. But now Miami's going to be fighting this thing about doing it with Tyler Van Dyke. And he's definitely a lot different quarterback than De'Aaron King. Playing on the road against North Carolina, it's going to be a tough challenge. And anytime a team gets like this, I always feel like the beginning of the season for college football teams is always very important because momentum builds, the hype, the surrounding, how the fans feel. If you're going to take losses at the in a season, I always feel like you want them at the end of the year. I know it's not good for momentum, but it's sometimes you can dig yourself into this big hole, and I think that's kind of where Miami's at. And from a Miami standpoint, you definitely were hoping that they could pull that one off against Virginia. Because, like I said, they've only played 1 conference game, so they're kind of still essentially in it. They just got to play a lot better. So, Gregory, okay, let's go into North Carolina. I know we're going to talk about Sam Howell and Josh Downs for sure. Miami fans remember what happened last year against North Carolina, 62-26 loss, particularly running the ball all over the field, 554 rushing yards, school record against Miami. Let's talk about North Carolina's running game. Different guys I know from last year, but maybe talk a little bit about, Ty Chandler and DJ Jones, kind of what you've seen from them. What kind of threat do they possess? Again, I've had a chance to see these guys. I think they still can run the ball, even if they're not that same caliber.
Yeah, so the rushing attack is still going to be a emphasis on Saturday. But it'll be completely different than last year. And I think at the beginning of this season, when Sam was running the ball, everyone thought it was because the running backs can't. That's not necessarily the case. DJ Jones is finally healthy and just had his best game of the season against Florida State. He was 5.5 yards per carry, which I mean is solid, right? It's nothing great, but it's better than what you sometimes UNC has done this season. And Ty Chandler can be explosive if he's patient. That's kind of been his issue, is trying to get to a hole that's not quite yet opened, even though that was the hole that was supposed to be opened. When he's patient, and he gets past that first line, he's very good. And then you've got Sam, who is a legit running threat and will be looking to rush the ball, especially with Miami's just strengths on the ends. If he can get around Miami's ends, then he's going to be wanting to run the football. He's slowly learning how to slide and protect himself. He kind of did it for the first time against Florida State. He made 9 defenders miss against Florida State, a team that is very talented and kind of harps on themselves as being fundamentally sound sometimes in defensive mind when it comes to tackling and things like that. And he led every ACC player in that category. So that's kind of where rushing wise, it's not going to be constant handoffs to Javonte Williams and Michael Carter, or to Ty Chandler and DJ Jones, like it was to Javonte and Michael Carter, right? Like that was hand the ball off. We're going to run through you. We're going to run around you. We're going to hurdle you. Javonte, that run, I think about that run a lot. Javonte is one, but so it'll be there. It'll just be different. And I don't know. It's definitely easier to stop than last year. So I think that's kind of my point. It'll be different, but it's not necessarily going to be impossible, especially if you can get to Sam Howell and contain him. Because then if you make Ty Chandler and DJ Jones and then Caleb Hood's, they're evaluating him. So it's not necessarily that, you can't stop Ty Chandler and DJ Jones. You definitely can. But if you stop Sam Howell, then it makes their job even harder. Ty Chandler and DJ Jones, that is. So that's kind of where UNC's rushing attack is at. It's not bad by any standards. I think here we go. I had it earlier. Yeah, I mean, they're third in the ACC in rushing attack, and it's because of Sam Howell. So it'll just be a completely different look than what they've seen out of Sam the last 2 years as far as on the ground.
And it's going to be interesting. I had a chance. I asked Coach Diaz this week leading up to the game about, the rush defense. He felt like early in the year they were getting closer to being that, good stopping the run team that they've been under Diaz when he was coordinator, things like that. And 3.5 yards per carry is kind of what they're aiming for. That's always their goal. It's got away from them a little bit this year. They're at 4.2. Last year was 4.6. So it's going to be, and the thing he noted when I asked him about it, he thought maybe the issues has to do with maybe, getting those big runs, the big plays is kind of been a big factor. And I think it was a poor sign that Virginia comes in, not known for being a running team, and they were able to run the ball. And I think, you understand Michigan State's ability to run the ball earlier this year, even Appalachian State, with the guys the two that they had, and obviously Alabama can run. So it's going to be interesting. And I think it's going to be interesting, particularly with this game, because like you said, even though that North Carolina, those backs aren't quite what those guys had before, they're so productive. And now Sam Howell, and I think it's going to be interesting. And defensive back coach Travaris Robinson spoke about playing man and zone, kind of that combination. I feel like that's going to maybe play a factor in Sam trying to defend Sam running the ball. If you, for example, if you go man all across the field in that back seven, particularly, you're leaving yourself exposed, and Sam seems to run the ball up the middle really well. Like you said, he's sliding, he can pick up yards. That's going to be very frustrating for Miami's defense. Stay with Sam a little bit more, Gregory. I know you touched on the running part, but what are you seeing with him? And I think most people with, with the inconsistency of North Carolina as a team can kind of point to Sam a little bit with that. Um, but again, when he's on, I mean, he's still very electric, and he's still a threat. And obviously, he's done well against Miami in his career.
Yeah, I mean, and he's still. I talked to Phil Longo about this, and he's still putting up good numbers. Just for Sam Howell standards, they're not good numbers, right? Like he's still completing 60% of his passes. He's got over 10 yards per attempt. Like those are good numbers. If you've got a quarterback that is like throws the ball as much as Sam does, which he's approaching 200 attempts almost through 6 games, and you're averaging 10 yards per attempt, most quarterback coaches in the country are going to take those numbers. 16 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. He showed a what's the word? Leading to maybe throwing more picks that he's had in the past early on this season. But other than the interception against Florida State this past weekend, like he's cleaned that up. Now the fumbling issues early on were not great as well, and I think that was we talk a lot about his ability, not his ability, but him wanting to do too much. And what Longo said about Sam's standards being, or Sam's current stats being lower than what he holds himself to, is when he is trying to do more than he's capable of, and he's capable of a lot. That's where the issues arise. Now, if he stays within the current game plan and what needs to be accomplished, he's on. If it's getting the ball in Josh Downs in space, he's solid. If it's pulling properly on an RPO, not because he doesn't trust the receivers, but more because he sees the opening and keeps it when he should, great. If he scrambles and actually throws the ball away rather than fighting for extra yards and takes a sack, great. But those are the issues that they've had to deal with, and Phil Longo calls it damage control. And that's what Sam was able to do against Florida State. And the offense, outside of the bad red zone play in the fourth quarter and outside of the interception and the penalties, was fine. Even Longo said, look, like if you take that away, we're kind of having a game that we were used to the last 2 years, but we weren't getting tackled behind the line of scrimmage. We weren't getting sacked. We were moving the ball, but then we just couldn't get over that hump. And so when it comes to Sam, I think if he can stay within himself and not try to force things, that's when he's still dangerous. Now, if Miami can make him try to force things, then he can get a little sporadic and throw it into double coverage on the outside, fight for yards and get sacked, and the ball can get put on the ground. And so it just kind of depends on him succumbing to under pressure. But the unfortunate thing, I think, for Miami going into this game, coming off the Florida State game, is Sam finally felt comfortable for the first time. And if the offensive line can keep that up, then it's going to be a very confident Sam Howell on Saturday, vice versa. So,
Yeah, and for the most part, Miami, the quarterbacks have done well against Miami. I think, I remember reading the comments, Brendan Armstrong after the game. He felt like he didn't play well. He wasn't. He thought he left a lot of throws out there, and just kind of watching some of the throws, they had some nice throws. Kind of remind me of some of the stuff North Carolina does with kind of peeling guys around the outside and kind of freeing up some big space. And it felt like Brendan just missed a few. So, but for the most part, and I think that's what the biggest issue about this game, or the biggest concern from Miami's standpoint, is they've just not made the quarterback really uncomfortable or forcing the bad throws. They're not a team that picks off a lot of passes. So it's going to be hard. And like I said, Miami's going to have to find a way to get to the quarterback, or get behind the line of scrimmage, put pressure on Sam to maybe make him, like I said, more uncomfortable. But let him sit back there. And obviously we've seen some of the throws that he's been able to make over his career. I think particularly going downfield, Miami's done a pretty good job so far on just kind of see where they rank at allowing the 25-yard passes. They've actually done a good job, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily sustainable in the sense that, like this game, it feels like, maybe they could give up a couple, but we'll see. I think a lot with Miami is going to have to be, inspired football. And the two things: understanding that they can't go back and fix 2 and 3, but understanding that they can still, if they can just pull this off somehow, that they're going to be, maybe can ride some momentum. And I felt like last game against Virginia, they could have rallied around Tyler Van Dyke. I think maybe they'll do it this game, but it felt like that was the game that they could have. You see teams all the time in sports kind of rally behind the guy that the backup guy, even though you don't expect them to pull off the win, but it just didn't happen until late. They
Mhm.
got back into it, but ultimately weren't able to do it.
You mentioned the deep ball. I think if Miami wins this game, it's gonna because of what it's gonna be because of stopping Josh Downs defensively and the short passes. Because it's not the deep ball is just not a threat this year. Antoine Green and Emery Simmons, the last two games, have 4 catches for 28 yards. And those are who they're trying to get the deep ball to. It's just not there. So I think even though Miami has been successful, you mentioned it, whether or not sustainable, I don't think that needs to be the emphasis this week because UNC, because they're trying to get back on track, right? They're coming off of a really disappointing loss and they're going to try to do what they know they're successful at, which currently is really only getting the ball to Josh Downs. So if you can eliminate him and can kind of rely on your talent, maybe a Bubba Bolden on the outside and things like that, to leave or to beat Antoine Green and Emery Simmons on the outside, then even if they're one-on-one, it hasn't Sam and the outside receivers haven't shown that same ability that they had last year. So I think with the deep ball, that's super important to consider going into this game. Is UNC explosive still and has that capability? Yes. Does it look different? Also, yes. Right. So just getting rid of Josh Downs, and if you can hold him to under 100 yards because he's been held to that in 2 games. That's it. So I think that kind of needs to be the focus in the passing game, in addition to getting pressure on Sam. But the deep ball is just, it's not a threat. I mean, it can be, but it doesn't need to be the emphasis or the focus, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I want to note about Miami's secondary, last game we saw Gervin Hall starting safety. He was actually moved down, played into that slot corner role. Asked Coach Robinson about that, if that's kind of the plan for him, or if they're going to move him back to safety. And partly the reason is the play of freshman James Williams at safety, 6'5" guy. I think they're going to stick with him to play alongside with Bolden, and then keep Gervin Hall a smaller safety. They'll actually like his cover ability, so we'll see how that matches up. Let's stay on Josh a little bit. Josh Downs, like I said, the numbers are crazy. You watch him, the abilities there. He's impressive to watch. Not a big guy, but makes big catches. Just your thoughts on Josh and what makes him so tough to guard against.
He knows exactly where to go after he gets the ball. Um, as far as just when his like it's not his first, like when you talk about receivers, right? You consider their first move. It's usually off the line to get to start running the route. What Josh is really good at is obviously he's super quick off the line and whatnot, but it's his first move as soon as he gets the ball in his hands. And that's why he has almost over 200 yards after the catch, more than the next receiver in the country. When he gets that ball in a quick 7 yard in or a corner route or anything, and he just knows where to go and has a great awareness to continue to pick up yards. And that's why UNC is running a lot more bubble screens to him and doing things that at the beginning of the season they weren't really doing, as far as quick, Philongo calls it quick hitters, and whatnot. And so that's where Josh is just so prolific and so successful and is currently on pace to break all 3 UNC single season receiving records, touchdown, catches, and yards. And it's not even going to be any close at this point. The only thing that might be close is touchdowns because he only has 7, whereas I think the record's 12. So he's on pace to break the receiving yards record by over 300 yards. It's insane. And what even crazier about it is because he's the slot guy. Whereas the last 2 years, Daz Newsom has been great, but it's been Diami on the edge. So that's why everyone was thinking, yeah, we know Josh Downs is good, but we also know what Sam and what Phil like to do. So it's definitely been an adjustment to get used to. But then it goes back to saying, same thing for Miami defensively. It's going to be different than last year because the best player on the field is Josh Downs because of just how he can create yards that might not appear to be there, but he's going to find.
And you touched on the offensive line already. And I think a key for Miami's defense, just in general, essentially every game, if they can get pressure, they like the tackles for loss from the defensive line, applying pressure. I still think they're going to roll out pretty much what we've seen the last few games or this season with 8 or 9 defensive linemen, pretty much the same amount of snap counts. They're really close. I think that will continue. So they'll look to get back there, against the run as well. Can't get beat off the edge like we saw a number of times in the running game last year. So let's flip this over, because I think obviously a big storyline in this one is the North Carolina offense, Sam Howell, and what they were able to do last year against Miami. But on the flip side, Miami's again Tyler Van Dyke. He's going to make his third start. So, but now it's official that it's his team. And Jake Garcia was a true freshman who I thought was a guy with really good upside, maybe could challenge Tyler this year, but he's out for at least another month. So by all means, it's Tyler Van Dyke's team.
Mm-hmm.
The backup they have is Peyton Matoka. He's not played a lot, and I don't think he's a threat to Van Dyke there. With Tyler, and let's talk about North Carolina's defense, but just kind of some of the things I said earlier about Tyler is struggled against Virginia at times, didn't look good, but I think he gets credit for making big plays. He had that nice about 20, 30-yard touchdown run late in the game against Virginia. And we've heard this from his teammates. They're saying, hey, look, I know he's not necessarily classified as a runner, but he's got a little bit of speed and things like that. And I think we saw that in that run. But he's a big guy, 6'4", guy that wants to use his arm a little bit. One thing that's kind of surprised me a little bit, they did a lot of rollouts with Tyler last game. Again, you think of him more as a pocket guy. They were able to roll him out to the right a little bit. I think when he goes to his left, like a lot of right-handed quarterbacks, can struggle. I think sacks can be an issue with him. So that would be key for Miami's offensive line. And but yeah, I guess let's talk about North Carolina's defense. I want to point this out, Gregory. I meant to mention this earlier when we talked about the teams. I want to bring these stats to the table. Again, this is where these two teams rank in against FBS teams in the ACC. So Miami's 12th in total yards in offense, 11th in defense, whereas North Carolina's 4th on offense, 6th on defense. So I think that's kind of what we're saying is like, yes, there's some issues maybe with North Carolina on consistency, but there are some positive signs,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Miami kind of floating to the back a little bit too much on these stats. So let's talk about North Carolina's defense. I want to start with the pass defense, because you see that the total yards, I think they're second in the ACC, but then you look at Pro Football Focus, and a lot of those guys in the secondary aren't highly graded. So what's your take on what's going on in the secondary, in particular, how that affects how they'll defend Tyler Van Dyke and maybe the passing game of Miami?
Well, you mentioned the PFF grades. A lot of that stems from the majority of missed tackles are happening in the secondary. And PFF with their grades, I get it's a -2 to 2 scale. But if I was grading a missed tackle by like a nose tackle versus a missed tackle by a safety, that missed tackle by the safety is way more crucial than a missed tackle by the lineman. And that's kind of what defensive coordinator Jay Bateman said is if they get the ball into their secondary and our secondary is missing tackles, there's no one left, right? So that's kind of where the grading stems from. And also, I think those receiving yards allowed numbers are a bit skewed because teams aren't trying to win the games in the air against Carolina. Look what Georgia Tech did. Jeff Sims ran all over them. Look what Florida State did. Jordan Travis ran all over them. And so I think it hurts Miami a lot with not having De'Aaron King out there, because as inconsistent or just not as good as De'Aaron King has looked as what people thought he would, he could have had a career day against Carolina on Saturday. I'm very confident in that with his legs. I think Jordan Travis was the #1 graded quarterback this week, and I don't know if he's ever even been sniffed the top 10 a single week, right? Like that's where UNC's rush defense, I know you mentioned the pass defense, but like teams aren't trying to beat him through the air. And that's why Jay Bateman and the UNC was okay letting Britton Armstrong throw for 550 yards because they know he's good. And it's not necessarily that they don't believe that they can stop him, but if they let a team do that and run the ball against them, that score is flipped. It's not 59-39 UNC. It's probably 59-39 Virginia. And yeah, like Tony Grimes, very good at football. Kyler McMichael has shown the ability to be very good at football. they like to move Jacarius Conley around between safety and nickel, depending on what they need to stop. If they need to stop the run more, then they're probably going to move him up and whatnot. But I think when it comes to the passing defense, it's really, like I said, it's skewed to what teams are trying to do to beat Carolina, because their secondary is good, but it's not necessarily why they're losing games other than the tackling issues.
I think for Tyler Van Dyke, just kind of watching him, obviously in games and seeing him in practice, we got to see him all spring. If you guys remember, Derek King missed the spring, so we were able to
Mm-hmm.
see Tyler out there. And kind of just my takeaways with him again, 6'4", big arm, but he does like to throw short. And I think what we saw against Virginia is he'll throw short, kind of try to be conservative. I think that's kind of by nature, and with his personality. However, he's got the arm strength to go deep, and I think that'll be the key. Is if Miami can hit on some of those. I touched on Mike Harley earlier. I wasn't able to ask Rhett Lashley this, but one of the things he said, the offensive coordinator at Miami, he said that they don't go into games specifically trying to target certain individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, when you watch other teams play, or particularly in the NFL, you always hear about getting guys going, especially your strengths. And I feel like Miami would be better served if they really did try to get a Mike Harley going. I think particularly with what's going on with Will Mallory at tight end. I asked coach if he thought maybe going some 2 tight end sets. I think maybe that might be something to watch for. But I think ultimately, I think Miami's still trying to do that short passing game, high completion percentage. I think you'll see maybe some throws to the running backs. Very curious to see how Jalen Knighton does in this one. Suspended for the first 4 games, plays against Virginia. Now we got this long bye week. I feel like maybe it felt like watching Jalen. There was a few runs where you kind of get up and he kind of hits his hands where he felt like he could have had a bigger run. And I felt like the crowd too was just like, you could see maybe if he just kind of missed one arm
Mm-hmm.
tackle or something that maybe he could have got it going. So I think he's going to be a factor, both running and passing. That'll be a key. And obviously if Miami can run the ball, certainly that'll ease up some pressure with Tyler. And Miami always wants to be balanced. That's kind of what their goal going into it. And like you said, it's been interesting seeing how North Carolina's been defended opposing teams with the run pass. And I think for Miami, for them to get it going, I think they got to find a way to be productive. One thing too about Tyler, he doesn't seem, not that it can't happen in this one, but he doesn't seem to throw the ball errantly. Throwing picks doesn't seem to be part of him. Like I said, anytime you go on the road, though, it's always a factor, especially with a young guy. You never know if he's going to just not play well, but that'll be something I think maybe to watch for. And then how will he respond to adversity? That's always big for a quarterback. What else? What else defensively from North Carolina that you're seeing? Maybe some keys to this one.
They've got to be able to get pressure, not from the interior, but from the outside. It's because it just hasn't been there from Tamon Fox, outside linebacker, Des Evans and whatnot. Like their best pass rushers have been Kamen Rucker, who is a hybrid outside linebacker and on the line. He plays both. And then Miles Murphy, who also plays on the line. And yeah, those guys are great. But if you can get pressure on the outside and really make Van Dyke uncomfortable, then you might see some of those errant throws that haven't been there, right? Because especially in a hostile environment, if he can see the guys that are coming at him right in front of him and then get to the edge, then he might be able to scramble and pick up some yards, even though, like you said, like not something he wants to do. He's definitely not Derek King, but any quarterback against Carolina that has been able to get to the outside will have space in front of them. But if that pressure is coming here and forcing into those best tacklers in Kamen Rucker, into Miles Murphy, Ray Bahasik, then that's where things might get interesting as far as what Van Dyke is capable of, and he'll definitely be tested. I think that's going to be a key for UNC because their best guys are in the interior right now, just based on who's performing and who's playing well. And they're certainly capable on the outside. I mean, Tamon Fox has more sacks in his UNC career than Lawrence Taylor, right? Like they're capable guys that just haven't been executing. And I think it's going to be an emphasis to create that pressure, especially with a not a veteran quarterback coming in and just kind of being handed the keys. Hey, first game, with the team. Like it's your team, and you have to go on the road. Um, it's not easy for anybody to do. So that'll definitely be something UNC talks about if they haven't talked about already when they start looking ahead towards the game on Saturday.
Yeah, I think, like I said from the jump, this is not where these teams expected to be at this point. But look, there's plenty of games still left, and like I said, I know the fan bases. I think it's been very interesting to see the North Carolina fan base, just how excited they are with football, and it hasn't always been like that over the years. And I think it's disappointing from their standpoint that it's not worked out, but it's it's still good that they have expectations and hopes, and there's a passion for North Carolina football. I think that's been good to see, and I think obviously from the Miami standpoint, a lot of passion, a lot of energy, and some fire. And they want to see Miami perform again. Miami did get the win against Appalachian State, but that didn't feel great because it was only a 2-point win and got it late. So there's been a lot of disappointing results for Miami. So very curious to see how these teams play on Saturday. Doesn't have the stakes in terms of the Coastal Division that you thought it would with both teams. But once again, you're only 0-1 in the conference.
Yeah, they're still in
worse. Right. Even if it doesn't feel like it, so we'll see how they
outside of Pitt, like who's a threat?
Virginia Tech's 1-0, but they're not, I think.
Oh, true. Yeah. They're in the same boat as Miami as far as like they just haven't played conference games.
Right. So I think that's, it's very interesting. But we said this, remember when we talked over the summer, I was like, by the time this game rolls around, looking at the schedule, North Carolina's already going to play a lot of ACC games. I thought that was going to play actually to their favor in the sense that they're used to playing in the conference, and you expected them to be on a roll heading into this one. And then obviously things have changed there. Miami's playing without De'Aaron King, so things are different there. So still very curious to see the results. Again, appreciate you talking to you. It's always good. You guys do great work over there inside Carolina. So definitely appreciate you, Gregory. I'll let you get going, but just really curious to see how these teams, not just for Saturday, but just how they finish the rest of the year. Because it certainly could keep going in the wrong direction, or maybe that they salvage a little bit of the season. And one thing I said earlier during the bye week for Miami was, look, there's still motivation from players. I know sometimes you look at team results, but particularly a lot of guys want to play at the next level and perform well. And I don't think they're just going to mail in the season. Mentioned Sam Howell is a guy that was highly regarded for the NFL draft. Obviously he's going to be playing for, there's just a lot to play for, even if it doesn't always feel like it from a fan standpoint. So, all right, Gregory, man, I'll let you get going. Appreciate you. We'll take care.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. Always great to see you and talk a game that was a little different conversation than we thought we were going to be having even literally 2 months ago. So sounds good, Christopher. I appreciate it.